with that, and he's gonna tell us a bit about their journey since setting a goal and how they're making progress.
All right, well, thanks, Lauren, and thanks, John, for that overview. So I'm going to talk, give some more detail to some of the things that John mentioned. So maybe you might find yourself in this situation. I found myself in this situation in 2017 when we set a goal, and I was like, okay, great, now what do we do? So we set a goal that by 2025 we would source all of the electricity that we consume through renewable means. And when we pitched that to our leadership as the goal that we wanted to set, this is basically the plan that we outlined. In order to achieve that goal, there are really only 3 pathways to get there, and John mentioned all of them. You can reduce your energy use, produce renewable electricity, and then purchase renewable electricity or renewable energy certificates. And I think it's really a combination of all 3 of these things where it makes the most sense. So for our organization, we kind of did a rough estimate where we plan over this time period to reduce our energy use by around 35%. And that's really where you see the majority of the savings that you might get from trying to achieve this kind of goal. And then the next part is we plan on producing roughly 60% of all the electricity that we consume, build either wind or solar power to produce electricity. And we anticipate, at least in our area, if we build these in New York State, we'll actually save money doing so. And then there's always going to be a little bit of flex, whether you add some more square footage or you add a new MRI or several of them. There's always going to be some electricity that we need to account for, and so in those cases we'll need to purchase some renewable energy. So if you just look over a timeline, this was our rough plan over that time period from 2017 to 2025. As you see, the brown power steadily goes down till it gets to 0 in 2025, and we anticipate every couple of years we're going to sign on to another renewable power purchase agreement or some other type of arrangement to either produce or purchase renewable energy. So I'm going to just dig into some details on each one of those categories. So path 1, reducing your energy. The first step to take in this is to really just set a target, whatever the number might be, over whatever time period you think makes the most sense. 10%, 15%, 25%. We spend a lot of time benchmarking our buildings and our organization as a whole, which is where we came to that pretty high number, but that's because our buildings are unfortunately very inefficient. And so what's great about all of these energy savings is they roll over year to year. And so we presented a range. If the electricity that we reduce is normally consumed in off-peak hours, then the savings are going to be quite a bit less than if that energy was consumed in on-peak hours, where the rates are quite a bit higher. So we presented that range, but at the end of the day, the overall savings are very, very substantial, which is probably the biggest selling point, at least for our leadership, was to see those dollar savings. And so kind of digging into this a little bit more deeply, when you think about reducing electricity, there are really only 3 areas in a building that consume electricity. There is lighting, heating and cooling systems, and then all the stuff that plugs in the walls. That's pretty much it. Everything can be categorized in one of those 3 areas. And so the solution for reducing electricity in all of those areas really just boils down to 2 things. Just turning things off when they're not in use, or utilizing more efficient technology. And so here is just a table of a bunch of different projects and kind of rough roughly what the percentage reduction you might see in a given building if you were to implement them across the entire building. So lighting is one of the biggest categories by just upgrading your lamps from fluorescent technology to LED lighting can save you anywhere from 10 to 15%. Depending on what type of building you have, it might be even more. It could be upwards of closer to 20%. But just upgrading those, just changing out light bulbs has a very significant value proposition. And the paybacks also can be, in some cases, almost instantaneous. And we see kind of on the long end 4 years, but most of the paybacks for those projects in our organization are right around 1.5 to 2 years. Optimizing chiller equipment, we've seen a lot of savings for several of our hospitals, and we're planning to do those types of projects at all of our larger locations. Optimizing building management systems, HVAC setbacks, just to dig into one of these, OR, HVAC setbacks, that's basically, when our ORs, they're not used 24/7, but for many hospitals, and it's the case for ours, they're just on 24/7. So all the temperature settings and humidity settings, all of that are just constant. And so if you can set those back, you can save a pretty significant amount of energy by doing that. And I won't go dig into all of these. One that was pretty interesting for us was our vending machines. We actually plugged a meter onto one of our vending machines and realized that each vending machine costs anywhere about $500 to $600 a year just to stay on. When you multiply that across the entire organization, it's pretty significant. And so we asked our vending machine vendor if they could give us new equipment that has occupancy sensing built into it. And at the end of the day, we ended up saving somewhere around $60,000 a year just by upgrading just our vending machines. So let's see, let's move on here. So path to produce. In the renewable space, there are a lot of generators of electricity that are carbon free, but for renewables, it really kind of only boils down to solar and wind. And at the end of the day, you're trying to ask the question, okay, do we want to produce solar and wind on site or off site? And for most places, unless you have a lot of land available to you, off-site is the main answer to that if you actually want to build your own energy generating projects. And then after this, it pretty much just boils down to different financing options. So I put on here the 4, although they're all labeled as 1, but really, the 4 most common financing options, at least that I'm aware of. I'm sure there are others that are probably even more complicated than these. But I just thought it'd be helpful to walk through these. So probably the easiest one to understand is just purchasing a renewable energy generating system. So say a solar array that you want to put on one of your rooftops. The advantage of doing a project this way is it really does have the best payback, and I'll go through some of those details I think on the next slide. The disadvantage is it requires a large capital investment, and because currently 30% of the project you can get a tax credit for, that tax credit is useless if you're a not-for-profit organization. So you need to figure out how to have a for-profit entity finance that program in order to get the benefit of that tax credit. Lease to own is somewhat similar. Instead of purchasing outright, you just take out a loan basically and make payments on it. So another financing organization owns the equipment, and then after a period of time, you own it. So I think the minimum amount or length for this type of agreement is 7 years. And the con to that is, again, you need to have an entity that has a tax appetite, or not have a tax appetite, but an entity that pays taxes, because you can't transfer a system that was incentivized with a tax credit to a not-for-profit institution. But the main advantage of this is you don't need a capital investment, and you can start saving money. It can be net positive from day one. Now, a power purchase agreement is probably the most common way that not-for-profit organizations finance these type of programs. And basically how these deals are set up is you agree to a fixed rate for power, say just 10 cents per kilowatt hour, that you're going to pay for all of the electricity that is generated from the equipment. And each state is different on how they incentivize these programs. In New York State, I've learned we're somewhat unique in that we basically just have a $1 per kilowatt hour credit that all of the utilities are required to give to whoever owns the array. So for us, we just have to make sure that our PPA rate is less than whatever that credit is in order for it to be cash positive. The main downside to this type of financing option, though, is they typically require very long-term contracts, and typically in excess of 20 years. So they're typically 20 or 25 years. I've heard of some places doing them for 30 years. But that time period is decreasing really every day as we move forward. So I anticipate in the next couple of years we'll be seeing contracts that are maybe like 15 years. And then the last one that is a way to finance these projects is called a contract for differences. And the advantage of this is it can be pretty lucrative, but it can also be extremely risky. So how this type of arrangement works is the power that is generated from the either solar or wind facility is sold in the zone or utility district that it's being generated in. And whatever market rate that exists in that zone, if that market rate is greater than the agreed upon rate that you agreed to buy the power at, you actually get that difference. So that's the lucrative side of it. However, if that market rate is less than the agreed rate that you agreed to for that power, you have to pay the difference. And so that type of arrangement has been around for a long time for lots of other types of power, but it can also be used in this green power market. So those are probably the four common ones. I'm sure there are much others out there that are much more complicated. It can get very tedious trying to dig through all of them. At the end of the day, if you're uncomfortable, seek help. I know that Practice Greenhealth has a lot of resources. There are other entities out there that will walk you through all of these things for a fee, of course, and some of those can be very helpful as well. Or just reach out to other Practice Greenhealth members. We're all in this together, and all trying to help us everyone to succeed in this space. So one project that we did was build it was a 500 kilowatt, half a megawatt solar array on top of one of our sites. And so for this project, the payback was roughly 3.7 years, and the rate of return was right around 16%. And if you look at the levelized cost of electricity, which is the equivalent $1 per kilowatt hour charge, if you add up all of the costs for the project and then divide that by all of the energy generated by the project over its lifetime, you get to just under 4 cents versus what we pay now, which is about 10 cents. So it saves quite a bit of money over the long run for all the power that it generates. But this was our first project, and what we learned from it, at least for trying to explore other on-site opportunities, is that we would need to install an array that's roughly 200 times the size of this if we wanted to put if we wanted to generate all of the renewable power on site, which is not really all that practical for most places. So the majority of projects, if you're trying to generate it yourselves, must be off site. So another example I want to share was we actually just opened this. This is a 20-acre solar farm, and we purposefully sought to open it on the darkest day of the year, just to prove the point that solar still makes sense in a climate that's as bad as ours, where your panels are covered in snow, in upstate New York. And so this is a 20-acre solar farm, 5.4 megawatts, and we did this deal through a power purchase agreement. And so, like I briefly explained earlier, New York State provides a per kilowatt hour credit. That it's a somewhat complicated formula, but it ranges from around 7.5 cents to close to 10. And so as long as we are able to get our PPA rate less than that, we're able to save money right from the get-go. And for this one, we have a fixed PPA rate that's over 25 years. And we're hoping to continue to do similar projects to this one moving forward. So that was the reduce, the produce pathways, and then the final pathway would be to purchase renewable energy certificates. And so this is basically, at least for our organization, our plan, this would make up the smallest portion of our goal to attain that 100%. Mainly because we're not really directly contributing to new renewable energy generation being created. Basically, there are projects that are already completed somewhere, and they have this environmental value associated with all the renewable energy that's being generated that they're selling for whatever price they can sell it for. And currently, if you go out on the national market, you can buy these RECs for $1 to $2 a megawatt hour, less than 1/10 of a cent per kilowatt hour. And so if you do want to explore this option, some of the questions that we've asked is, do we want to support local renewables, or are we fine just purchasing RECs from anywhere? Are we fine purchasing RECs from all the way in Texas, being in New York State, or do we want to really try and support the local development of renewable energy within a certain boundary? Another one is, how do we verify that the RECs are actually legitimate? So a lot of states have pretty robust REC trading programs, but there's a lot of people out there that will sell you anything. So how do you figure out that the RECs you are purchasing are actually legit? And then also, how much are we willing to spend in this area for something that's not really tangible, and it could be something that's really far away. How much money are we actually willing to spend just to check a box, basically? And so similar to the last pathway, if you're uncomfortable in this area, reach out and seek help. There are lots of folks out there who are more than willing to offer advice and some feedback. And then, there are just a couple of other concerns with these types of goals, and I listed a few of them here. What if we add more square footage, whether we acquire a new building or just build a new one, or we open up a new wing, a pretty sizable wing? How does that affect the goal? What if we can't make the financial numbers pencil out? How do we? What's our game plan for convincing our leadership to continue on this journey? And again, where do I go for help? I think Practice Greenhealth is a great place to start first. Just reach out to your rep and ask, what can I do, or who can I talk to that can help me navigate this? So that was it. That's all I have.
Wow,
and I guess that's Lauren.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was just really so interesting You know, the vending machine anecdote was one I hadn't heard yet before, and I just think you explained so many of these complicated issues at the right level. And I think where you ended is actually a great segue to the first question, which is, you know, as you're looking at making these decisions, seek help. Well, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about what your process was and who you reached out to. I'll share, you know, Mike shared that Practice Greenhealth is a great place to start. And of course, I'm biased, but I agree with that. We've got, just skipping down to show you, and then I'll come back up, a number of resources that can really help you get started. We also, just for our Healthcare Climate Council, which both of these guys are members of, had an organization, which I'll throw in the chat box for people to look at, called the Business Renewable Center. We had them present to our council just a couple weeks ago. They've got some amazing resources about, especially if you're looking at power purchase agreements or virtual power purchase agreements, they're a wonderful place to get started. But for both Mike and John, I wonder if you could share just a little bit more about your experience, if you went down the path, and if you feel comfortable sharing the name of the company, that's great. If not, just to let us know, you know, was it worth it to pay a fee to have someone help you evaluate these opportunities and comb through the complex nature of some of these issues?
I can start. You know, for our organization, we reached out to some of those companies and, you know, didn't feel that what they would offer was something that we couldn't just do ourselves. So we felt like we had the capacity internally to figure all this stuff out. And so we ended up not, you know, working with one of the companies that is out there that is dedicated to helping organizations like healthcare and education figure this type of stuff out. But we do have quite a few resources that we already contract with. So like our legal, we have an external legal firm that we contract with already, and they provided quite a bit of support for us. We have another firm that we contracted with already that supplies all of our electricity, and we were able to leverage those relationships to really figure out a lot of these questions without paying any additional fees.
That's smart.
Yeah, in our case, before I came to the clinic, I ran a solar energy company that developed, financed, and built solar systems. So I knew a fair bit myself about the first three things on Mike's slide here, which is really well done. You know, buying it, leasing it, or doing a power purchase agreement. And we had already done a power purchase agreement ourselves when I got here. We did one 100 kilowatt system on our main campus. And I think the highest degree of difficulty is in the power purchase agreement and the contract for differences, because these are long, complex legal documents. So, and once you get into sort of these utility scale projects, I think having some advisor should be helpful. It's going to depend a lot on your, you know, you're going to have to convince your finance and legal teams that these are good ideas. And so for us, we did an RFP 2 years ago, ultimately selected a company called Schneider Electric that helped us look at it, do a bid process and look at a variety of different options. And they did it on a contingency basis where we didn't pay them unless we did something, which helped us get over the hump in terms of using their services. So, and we've gone through some discussions of virtual PPAs, which are super, you know, you start to get to 5 or 6 super complex legal terms. So having someone on your side of the table that has deep experience, I think, is really helpful in getting your own hospital's legal team comfortable in those terms.
That's great. The next and probably last question that we'll have time for, I'm just going to make my plug so that we can wrap up with both of you answering. So QueenMed is in Nashville this year from May 7th through the 9th, and one session in particular that many people on this call might be interested in, my colleague Jessica Wolf and James Evans, who works at Cleveland Clinic with John, will be presenting in a much more detailed format about how to track and how you actually walk through that process. So the last question that we got here was around, are you using any systems to help you track sustainability software, Excel, document, or otherwise?
I'll go first. So we've been doing this for 5 years. We built our own model, an Excel-based model. We shared that with Practice Greenhealth. That business intelligence is embedded into the tool, and I would say that intellectual capital that's available by putting your data into the Practice Greenhealth tool and getting your carbon footprint is something I used to charge organizations a fair bit of money to do. So this is a really amazing resource that's part of your Practice Greenhealth membership. I highly recommend using it. That's the right starting point, because you're going to have the key information on Scope 1 and Scope 2 delineated in a way that gives you a really great starting point if you haven't done this. It's really elegantly done.
Yeah, and for us, we also use just an Excel spreadsheet that we built right about 3 years ago.
Great. Well, thank you both so much, and thank you to all of our attendees who joined. I think people joined at different times, so just to say it, because I got this question a few times, the recording and the slides in PDF will be available. We'll have those on Greenhealth Academy in a few days, and I'll also send out a follow-up email. But we're here for additional questions. If you need us, here's our contact information. And of course, always reach out to your member engagement manager as well as you get started on this journey and have questions. I think both Mike and John said it well. This is a network that's built to support you in this process. So thank you again, and have a lovely afternoon, everyone. Take care.